For thousands of years, the rhythm of warfare was dictated by the skill of the craftsman and the limits of the human eye. A musket made in 1700 was an individual work of art, hand-filed by a smith, unique as a fingerprint. A soldier in the armies of Louis XIV fought in a world fundamentally similar to that of a soldier in the Middle Ages. Everything was bespoke, slow, and unreliable. But in the late 18th century, in the workshops of France and the armories of America, that ancient rhythm began to break. Humans learned how to apply the cold logic of science to the chaos of the battlefield. We call it the industrialization of warfare. Beginning around 1760 and exploding in the 19th century, this event marked the transition from weapons as art to weapons as engineering. It was the moment humanity unlocked the ability to mass-produce death and scale it beyond anything seen before. In the mid-18th century, the weapon industry was facing a crisis of consistency. An army might have 50 different cannons, and none of them used the same wheels or the same size balls. If a wheel broke on the battlefield, the gun was useless. It was a logistical nightmare. To understand how this revolution began, we must look at the three pillars of industrial supremacy that allowed the modern army to outpace the old world. First was the obsession with precision. For centuries, cannons were cast hollow, resulting in crooked barrels and wasted gunpowder. But a Swiss engineer named Jean de Maritz invented a horizontal boring machine that drilled cannons from a solid block of metal. This single innovation meant guns were lighter, straighter, and deadlier. Second was the standardization of design. The French officer Jean-Baptiste de Gribeauval realized that an army could not function if every part was unique. He limited cannons to specific classes and ensured that a wheel from one gun could fit onto another. And finally, there was the holy grail of manufacturing, interchangeable parts. Before the factories, there was the guild system. Skilled gunsmiths spent their lives learning to file a single lock to perfection. But the demand for weapons was exploding. Nations were drafting massive citizen armies, and they couldn't wait for artisans. They needed a way to make muskets faster and cheaper than anyone else. The first domino fell in 1785 when French gunsmith Honoré Blanc demonstrated that he could disassemble 50 musket locks, mix the parts in bins, and reassemble them at random. The weapon guilds hated this idea. They feared that if unskilled workers could assemble weapons from bins of parts, their years of training would be worthless. But the idea could not be killed. Thomas Jefferson sent the concept back to America, where it would eventually become known as the American system of manufacturing. The result was staggering. By the 1850s, armories like Springfield and private titans like Samuel Colt were using powered milling machines to churn out identical revolvers by the thousands. The weapon was no longer a personal possession. It was an industrial unit. While the factories were perfecting the gun, another revolution was happening in the chemistry lab. For 500 years, soldiers used black powder, which created a thick white smoke that blinded armies after the first volley. But the invention of smokeless powder cleared the battlefield, allowing soldiers to see and kill from miles away. The true turning point came when the mechanical genius merged with the chemical one. The invention of the brass cartridge allowed the bullet, powder, and primer to be sealed in a single unit. This killed the muzzle loader. A soldier no longer had to stand up and ram powder down a barrel. He could lie prone, hidden in the grass, and fire a breech loader. Then came Hiram Maxim, a man who realized that the recoil of a shot, energy that was usually wasted, could be used to load the next bullet. He built the Maxim Gun, the first true automatic weapon. It didn't need to rest. It didn't get tired. It simply poured out a stream of lead at 600 rounds per minute. The invisible army of mechanical killers was growing. As the technology grew, the landscape of battle changed forever. This was the era of the empty battlefield. In 1800, armies stood in bright lines, shoulder to shoulder. By 1900, the firepower was so intense that to stand up was suicide. Soldiers were forced into the mud, digging into the earth itself to survive. Not everyone welcomed the new age. Traditional generals, raised on the glory of the charge and the saber, recoiled at the industrial slaughter. They mourned the loss of bravery and the spirit of the bayonet, seeing machine warfare as cowardly. But the machine did not care about bravery. It only cared about efficiency. By the turn of the 20th century, the weapon revolution had matured. But a tragic paradox had emerged. The generals were still using the tactics of the 18th century, marching men in waves against the weapons of the 20th century. This mismatch would lead to the catastrophe of World War I. Looking back, the industrialization of weaponry was one of the most significant shifts in human history. It shifted the center of gravity from the warrior's courage to the nation's factory output. The legacy of the 18th century engineers is embedded in the very DNA of our modern military. We are the direct descendants of that first standardized screw. The weapon revolution didn't just build our armories. It fundamentally redefined what it means to fight, shifting us from a species that fought battles in an afternoon to one that can erase civilizations in an instant. We have inherited a world of boundless power and breathtaking precision. But we also carry the weight of the destruction that progress left behind. Revolutions arrive silently, and by the time we notice, we can't imagine war without them.